Welcome to the Doomscroll News Report here on Radio Taiwan International, where I, Hanna Bilinski, and my co-host,
Amanda Stevens,
two writers, political by necessity, cover some of the biggest international news stories dominating our news feeds from the last week. I'm Hanna Bilinski, and this week, we're going to talk about what happened in Venezuela and the many, many implications of that event. And there's quite a lot to cover with this, so we're just going to jump right into it. The topic of this week's Doomscroll News Report was basically decided for us when, in the early hours of January 3rd, 2026, the United States launched a large-scale military strike on Venezuela, targeting key military sites in Caracas as part of what the Trump administration termed Operation Absolute Resolve.
Oh, there was a nickname.
Yes, there was.
Got it.
And they captured President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, flying them to the U.S. to face federal charges, including narco-terrorism. The operation involved multiple strikes, and it was justified by Washington on national security and counter-drug grounds, but has drawn widespread international condemnation as a violation of Venezuelan sovereignty and international law, including from China and other global actors, and it prompted an emergency UN Security Council meeting. Venezuelan officials say the assault caused dozens to possibly over 100 deaths among military and allied personnel, while U.S. forces have begun reducing some naval assets in the region after achieving their objective. Now, there is a lot to unpack here, and many directions that we could potentially take the discussion. But the first thing I want to ask up top is just what your first reaction was regarding the strike. I know you texted me right away. And it went down, during the afternoon on our side of the world. So we were awake and we were getting live updates. And minutes after I got the news notification, I got a message from you.
It's like, I did wake up and I saw that there was news about strikes in Venezuela. But I had to come in to work on another program today. It wasn't a news day. And so I was kind of like low-key monitoring it, but I didn't read those articles because I was like, I don't know if it's bluffing or not. And then while I was in the middle of writing a script for another show that I'm doing, I got a ping externally that was like, hey, breaking news. The U.S. has just attacked Venezuela. And then I got a ping internally from RTI that was like, hey, can everyone just pay attention to this news that's updating and, maybe consider writing a story about it. And so then I was like locked in on the like breaking news update. So I texted you and I was like, by the way, hey. And then I felt guilty about it because I was like, you were probably at home with your son, enjoying your day.
I mean, I was so mad. I mean, I crashed out, as the kids say.
It's a valid crash out.
We had kind of been seeing
we actually even discussed that.
Right.
You and I specifically talked about how it didn't really feel like it was about drugs and it did feel like it was about regime change. We've had that exact discussion here before.
We almost expected it, but still, when it happened, it's like, are you serious?
I guess what I could say is that my immediate reaction was to text you and then to like catch up. I was like religiously reading the breaking news updates as they were coming in, which is a wonderful, terrible thing that we have today. But then I was just really shocked because while I expected some sort of forced regime change, I didn't expect it to happen in this way. And I didn't expect it to, I feel like we're going to get into this, but I guess I didn't expect it to set a precedent for the absolute unilateral to use our own language, unilateral change in status across the Americas.
Exactly. The United States framed the operation as a law enforcement and counter-narcotics action, but it feels like a pretty flimsy excuse for what they were really after, which is Venezuela's resources.
They kind of even stopped talking about drugs
exactly
as soon as I got Maduro on
it's such a
American soil.
So Venezuela holds the largest crude oil reserves on Earth, about 17% of global total reserves. So that's more than 300 billion barrels. And heavy crude is particularly attractive to the U.S. because American oil refineries are built to process heavy oil more efficiently than light oil. And if history has taught us anything, it's that if you've got oil, you can count on the Americans to come and take it from you. Plus, Venezuela has made it a point to cozy up to America's rivals, namely China and Russia. Controlling Venezuela's oil strengthens America's influence in the Western Hemisphere, while at the same time dealing a blow to China's attempts to diversify and the alliance Russia has been working on with Venezuela. Notably, most of Venezuela's air defense systems were from Russia, and a little bit from China also. At the same time, though, like you just said, this sends a signal that the U.S. is willing to use force unilaterally to get what it wants. And who's to say China or Russia won't use this move to justify similar action in the future? I mean, technically, Russia is already trying it in Ukraine, and China is constantly rehearsing it right here around us. America just managed to actually do it. So how do you think this is going to affect global power dynamics? Do you think it will only embolden them?
Usually on this show, I try not to be alarmist, but I do think that this is worth an alarm.
I'm alarmed.
Yeah, because I think that's exactly the precedent it sets, is like we have also spent the last year talking about 3 off and on. One of them in our regular news cycle and 2 of them here on Doom Scroll News Report between Russia and Ukraine. And then also what's happening in Israel-Palestine.
Right.
About one leader who uses the excuse that, oh, your leader is fake, so we don't need to respect them, as justification for an invasion.
Right.
Even if it's a potential invasion, or even if it's like the whole point isn't really invasion. That doesn't matter. That's the excuse.
Yeah.
So the United States latching onto that, and then just going through with the threat that's always been implied by all of these other conflicts around the world, sets an extremely dangerous precedent, which is that a bigger country, I mean, and it sets a colonial precedent,
right?
Which is that any big country can just come in
and bully a little,
not even like bully, just completely remake in their image, and there's nothing that anybody else is going to do about it, and that's okay, because we just decided that it's like whoever has the biggest stick at the party gets to decide what everybody else does.
Yeah.
And so it sets an incredibly dangerous precedent for what could happen in Taiwan, what could happen in Ukraine, what has already happened in Palestine, but just making it worse. And that's only for the current ongoing conflicts. That's not to say what could happen in the future between another one that we're always talking about, India and Pakistan. India doesn't get on our radar very often, but like Modi is definitely studying China and Russia. And at this point, Trump as well, to try to emulate those tactics. And so the more that leaders are allowed to get away with this kind of strong arm, unilateral world building, the more likely it is to happen in the future. I'm honestly glad that China and Russia did bring this to the UN, even though it was self-serving to try to show you America.
Pretty hypocritical too.
Very hypocritical, very self-serving. Really, definitely, when I saw their names on the list, I was like, oh, this is definitely a middle finger to moment. America. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I am glad that they were there at least, because I think regardless of the means, there has to be some kind of accountability for this. And I don't think that this kind of thing can be allowed to stand. And my own patriotism doesn't get in the way of that, because this isn't the kind of thing I'm patriotic for. This is a disaster.
Me neither. I have to say, when the news broke, part of my crash out was going to Google and kind of looking up what the implications might be for us right here in Taiwan.
I was also having my own like doom spiral where I was like, oh my God.
I didn't think, it wasn't so far as like thinking they were going to take the opportunity to move on us. I didn't think that.
Yeah.
But at the outset, I was like, oh my God, if he actually invades Venezuela and it becomes like a protracted conflict, then that could feasibly increase the risk of, say, a blockade here.
This is like the most insane thing that I've had to repeat on this show, which is that when we have to rely on the patience and long-sightedness of leaders like Putin and Xi Jinping, the world is in a truly dark place.
We're in trouble.
Because I think that's really like what will dictate whether or not this truly does set a precedent for those 3 ongoing conflicts is going to be the consequences that happen in the next month or so.
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, because we've discussed also that These are leaders who are very long thinking, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't make selfish actions.
They're like
but
empires.
They
this is their
are.
empire.
That's exactly it, and they are interested in seeing whether or not this is something that somebody can get away with.
Right.
And so, if the United States does get away with it, so to speak, or gets away with consequences that either of these countries feel they can shirk, I think we're more likely to see further action like this in the future.
It's a little bit scary, I
Yeah.
have to say. It is shocking that they were able to pull it off. I wrote about this during the week when we were reporting on it. It definitely does demonstrate that America's military might it really is still very much dominant, like it over everybody else, because a decapitation strike, that's technically what this is
That's what it's called. I remember because I had to convince everybody in the office, and I was like, I have receipts. It sucks. Military language is crazy violent.
Yeah, that's what I
insane.
learned. I learned it's called a decapitation strike.
Yeah.
And they pulled it off, which is not insignificant. China would not be able to replicate this here. They cannot come in and grab Lai Ching-te the same way.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing that we could say. As much as I say, like, this is worth an alarm, I don't think that we need to be worried about this happening, like, right now, today.
Yeah,
but
I think the
it's
payoff
like
will be
looking at
later.
it in the future.
Yes. Well, the other big question is what will become of Venezuela, because removing Maduro doesn't magically fix their problems. And in fact, the power vacuum could only create more problems.
And this is the other kind of complicating factor. I think it is a little bit more nuanced in that not all Venezuelans were united in backing Maduro.
No.
I still don't think that it was right, but I do think that adds a little bit more nuance to it.
That's
because
true.
of the internal situation.
And there was already a humanitarian crisis going down in Venezuela. They were dealing with hyperinflation, food and medicine shortages, and mass immigration, with millions of people fleeing the country in search of a better life elsewhere.
Yeah.
But then also there's these regional ripple effects that this could cause in neighboring countries and states like Cuba, which relies heavily on Venezuelan oil.
Or Colombia, which usually is the first recipient of all of those immigrants.
Now, of course, this question is way too big for either of us to really answer. It's too big for anybody to answer at this point in time, actually. But it does help me segue into my real question, which is this. Do you think American voters like us should be held responsible for the actions of this administration? As in, do you think if Americans had not elected Trump and it had been the other guy, or girl rather, instead, that this wouldn't have happened? Or would they have done it either way?
No.
You don't think so?
No.
You think it's definitely like a Trump, Hegseth, his administration kind of thing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, because let's look at this through the lens of the 2024 election, which would be Kamala Harris. I think that they are too interested, one, in not being a Trumpian state. That was sort of a problem, was sort of like the infighting between the two political parties. That's like a huge problem that's kind of paralyzing the United States right now, the United States government ability to react to this. I also think that they're too interested in working together with other countries.
Okay.
So even if Maduro were removed from Venezuela in, let's even say in 2025, had it happened, it wouldn't have been a unilateral move.
Okay.
It would have been a joint action. And it still could have been like a Western Hemisphere messing up everything for South America. I think that's a realistic alternate timeline where, like, oh, the Western powers, the UK, France, America, it's someone else decided, no, we don't want Maduro anymore. But I think that would have taken a lot more time. It wouldn't have happened in January. Other countries would have immediately come out in support and have had some kind of follow through. There also would have been any acknowledgement of the opposition leader who has, and the opposition movement in Venezuela, meaning the opposition to Maduro, who has been conspicuously ignored and frankly disrespected despite winning the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, I've noticed this also. They've just waved her away.
Yeah, she's no longer a useful tool to Trump, so he's kind of ignored her.
It definitely feels like he He's thinking just like Xi and Putin. He's treating it as his empire, his legacy.
He is. And again, whether or not he gets away with it is going to determine what happens in the future, because immediately afterward he started talking about Greenland.
Right. And I don't think he cares about any precedent set for the future, because he's on his way out. He's going to die, you know.
He's literally made a mistake in the press conference that I was listening to, and in his own quotes when he was discussing this, saying company instead of country.
Jeez.
And cutting himself off.
Okay, I really think he's senile, to be fair. Like, I think his brain is barely functioning at this point, unless they
regardless of
pump
whether or
him
not
full
he's
of drugs.
senile, I feel like he is just looking at the United States as a business, which is incorrect, because businesses don't have militaries most of the time.
He just wants to make history.
He wants to make history, and he wants to make an empire. Like, that's what he wants to do. And so he's just looking at this as like a hostile takeover, which ironically is exactly what it is, but he's seeing it as like a business hostile takeover. It's like, I know everybody will make money, so it'll be fine in the end. When it's not. Like, it's
really
a
not that
completely
simple,
different thing. So should the American voters be held responsible? I feel like if you voted for Trump, you bear a lot of responsibility for this. But I also feel like there are people who voted for Trump who were convinced to do so because of where they are and the media that they have access to. And everybody does have an individual responsibility for trying to be neutrally informed. But I think that the information climate does not make that as easy as it should be.
So this topic, everything we've been discussing about Venezuela, about the US, about China, about Russia, this all feeds into a phrase that I have been seeing floating around as I read just about geopolitics in general. This idea of a multipolar world. So before I get into that, Amanda, have you ever come across this idea, in jest or otherwise, that after some 70 to 80 years of dominance now, the age of American hegemony is drawing to a rather unceremonious close, like the fall of an empire? I know I see plenty of memes about the incoming Chinese era in which we will all become Chinese, globally.
Yeah,
but
I remember
don't know
seeing ads for this during the Obama
really?
campaign. Yeah, there was an ad that was like, don't vote for Obama, and it was like,
And
in the future, everyone will have to speak Mandarin. And I was like, oh, that'd be pretty cool. Like, low-key, I'd love that.
So have you seen much about this, like multipolarity?
I've never heard it referred to as multipolarity that I can remember.
Okay.
But I have come across the idea, and I believe in the idea that, like, the era of, like, U.S. dominance and U.S., like, imperial dominance, whether or not you want to call it that, we can all have different opinions at this, is coming to a close, and that it's going back to like a multi-power world.
Well, let me just define multipolarity really quick. So the concept of a multipolar world refers to an international system where global power is distributed among several influential states or blocs rather than being dominated by just one or two powers. So we were both born in the 90s, which was, I would say, arguably the height of American unipolarity, because after the Soviet Union fell in 1991, well, America was all that was left.
Right.
So all we've known is a world in which America has dominated, but at the same time been in relative decline, because, after you peak, you must fall. Do you think, given everything going on right now, that this is something we are moving toward, a multipolar world?
Yeah, absolutely. Because after reading this and after like preparing a little bit for this with you, I've already seen these words like move around in a lot of the things we've used, especially block.
Yeah.
So I think I even discussed this earlier last month, talking about the South American bloc and how the United States, before we knew that they were going to do the decapitation mission, wanted to make a South American bloc that would be friendlier to U.S. interests. I do think it is something we're moving towards, these blocks of power. I think that's the natural state of things. I think it's something we were already in and then we moved away from.
Some scholars have argued that China is already another world power. Like, we are in a bipolar world.
I think that is fair to say. And I think one thing that I would use to support that is that China has emulated a lot of the United States' own power building strategies, including the soft power.
Yeah.
And like when you look at something that we report on a lot on our regular news jobs is how China has been building soft power in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Central Asia, and in South America.
They're
which
networking.
Is something, right. That's and if you were unfamiliar, that is what building soft power is it's just networking.
Yeah.
So I would tend to agree that I don't think we've been in a unipolar world. I feel like we've been in at least a bipolar world for a while because of if you look at the news, which countries' actions make the biggest headlines. Yeah. And like across the world, not just in one country or another.
So do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing? You know, this multipolar world? Like I said, American dominance is all we know, you and I. And I would argue we have lived a life of extraordinary privilege relative to the rest of the world as a result of that.
Yeah.
It's a complicated question, I think, because although neither of us are very into the idea of dominance or imperialism or interventionism or all of the other dirty things America has been able to get away with just because it can't be challenged, you know, change is scary. The unknown is scary. So what will a world not so wholly defined by America look like? And how do you think it will impact our lives?
I would say that I don't know that I think it's a bad thing.
Okay.
But I wouldn't go so far as to say that I think it's a good thing because I think that it's really tricky when you get into global politics.
Yeah.
And it might be even impossible to know whether or not an idea will actually like play out as being beneficial for the majority of people. And like in my own mind, though people may disagree with me, like my example would be just the idea of communism, which is like Marxist communism on its face.
Sounds
in
good
my
on
opinion,
paper.
Right. It sounds good on paper. But every time that it has gone through like some where it's supposed to be enacted, something has gone wrong and it's led to
never quite works out.
Led to these sort of like pseudo dictatorial states where that is not the case, but now the government owns everything. And so that would be my example. I don't think a multipolar world is equivalent to a failed communist state.
No.
But I do think it's something that we should be cautious about. I also don't think it's something we should change, like we'll be able to change. So when I say we should be cautious about, I mean, I'm not saying we should back out and go back to unilateralism or unipolarity.
I mean, there's no going back now. It's impossible.
It's not something we can possibly do. But on one hand, I feel like having more voices at the table is better for if we want to really be a global world, and whether or not we want to, we are.
Yeah,
like a
we have to. We need to work together.
Globalization, that whole idea. I think it requires having more voices at the table. At the same time, that can make change much slower.
That's what I was going to say is in a multipolar world, it's going to be really, really important to have first-class diplomacy. Like you can't be having people who want empires, you know, at the helm. You have to have people who actually want to work together. And that's very
I would
hard
say
to do.
To answer like what would it look like? I feel like if the multipolar world with multiple blocks of influence is in the best case scenario, then we have to sort of rebuild or remake these other ideas that I think are rooted in good faith, like the UN. Yeah. And I think that they have to be given different levels of power.
I agree.
And I think that it will require a little bit more international government building. And I know a lot of countries, ours, the United States, China, and Russia, probably won't be really pleased with that.
Lots of conflicting interests there. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we have time for today's news report. A quick reminder that you can find all of our referenced articles in the show notes for today's episode. I'm Hanna Bilinski.
I'm Amanda Stevens.
Thanks for joining us on air today. Tune in tomorrow for more programs by Radio Taiwan International. And in the meantime, remember to stop scrolling and touch grass.
Touch grass.
Please touch grass. We'll see you next week.